Hey everybody, I'm Jessica Putnam-Phillips. Welcome into the ClayShare studio. This is our weekly Live at 5 broadcast. If you're just tuning in, every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, we do a live broadcast where we have tutorials, demos, Q&A sessions, all kinds of great fun stuff going on. And tonight we have Drew Seymour joining us from Clayscapes Pottery. Now, if you tuned in for ClayShareCon, you would have met Drew and his dad, Don Seymour. Their family owns Clayscapes Pottery in Syracuse, New York. And Drew tonight is going to be covering for me because I had hand surgery, so I really can't make pots. It's only been 5 days. I'm not really allowed to use the hand for another few weeks, so or months. We'll see. But Drew's going to cover, and he's going to answer your Q&A for kilns, but he's also going to show you how to repair kiln brick. Now I got a couple little news things going on for ClayShare to share with you all before we get over to Drew, but we have got a fabulous workshop with Kevin Kowalski this weekend. It's a two-parter. It's 3 hours this Saturday and 3 hours next Saturday. And so with this workshop, you get full access to it forever. So when you sign up and register for any of our ClayShare workshops, you have those workshops after they're over to watch those replays forever. So you watch it live with us, be part of the fun, and then come back and watch it later. So he's going to teach you mocha diffusion, and you can find out more about that on clayshare.com. And remember, premium members always save 20% off our workshops, and you don't have to be a member to buy any of our workshops. And we have more workshops coming down the line too, so check those out. So I'm going to throw it over to Drew because I know he cannot wait to show you how to repair some kiln brick. So, hey Drew!
Hello, how's it going, everybody? I'm Drew.
Hi, Drew. I'm so glad you're here with
us. Me too. It's good to be here with you guys. So I'm hanging out in the studio.
And I just wanted to let yeah.
Go ahead.
I don't want to interrupt you. I was going to say, I wanted to let everybody know if you have questions or comments for Drew, you just go ahead and type them in and I will see them and then I will ask Drew so that I can relay them onto him. Oh. All right, Drew, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. We got a little bit of a delay. So
that's the pass off.
So I'm going to show you guys how to do some brick repair. I've got 2 bricks here. I'm going to show you 2 different techniques of repairing brick. This one here, as you can see, is broke. And I've got the other part right here, so they fit together. And I'm gonna just kind of get right into it first. Let's do the brick repair first, and then we can talk about questions and things like that you guys may have later. Some things that you're gonna need to do your brick repair are gonna be, I've got a bucket of water here with a wet sponge. So we're gonna need that. We're also going to need some mortar. So I have a special mortar that you use. This is called smooth set mortar. It's a kiln cement that gets fired on into a hardened like glue. And then for the second brick repair that I'm going to show you guys, I have this nickel chrome wire, and I'm going to show you how to use that in conjunction with the mortar to make a stronger bond. So the first thing I'm going to do is tilt my camera down so that you guys can see everything. And I'm going to mix up my mortar for you. So let's tilt. It's just me, so sorry. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do here, adjust my camera. All right, so here's our mortar. I've got it in this little yogurt container because we're not going to need a ton. And you can see our brick here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a little bit of water, and I'm going to add it to my mortar. Probably got like an eighth of a pound here. And so we're going to add just a teeny amount, not measuring it or anything. And then I'm going to mix it. And see how I added just a teeny amount? See how liquidy that is still? That's too thin. So what I'm going to do is add more water sorry, more mortar, because what I'm aiming for is more of a like thick clay-like paste. Okay, so I just play with your ratios until you get it mixed to a consistency, and I'll show you. See that now it's paste, it's kind of like clumping together. So we're gonna mix that up nice and good. And we've got like this brick paste. You can see.
So we have a question about the mortar. Is all mortar the same?
All mortar is
like, is that like, okay.
Right, so like there's different mortars.
Not the same.
Especially if you're looking at like masonry or other mortars locally. You want something, this is a high fire mortar. It's designed to resist high temperatures. So you definitely want something that is designed to be fired. So now that we've got
would it be called it would be a refractory. So you're looking for
like a refractory cement. So now that I've got my mortar mixed up, I'm kind of going to set that to the side because I have to get my bricks wet. Now, one of the things that most people don't think about is your fire brick is porous, which means it's going to absorb moisture very easily. If I were to apply this cement, this mortar, which has water in it, directly to a dry brick, it's going to suck the moisture straight out of the mortar into the cement. And that's going to that's going to cause the mortar to shrink. And you're just going to break your brick again. So in order to kind of overcome that, I'm going to take this sponge, which is not wrung out very well. You can see I've got quite a bit of water in here still. And I am going to wet the surface where I'm going to be applying cement. And so as I dab this on here, I apply pressure, and that pressure releases water, moisture, into the brick so that it is absorbing into the brick. And you want to make sure that it's really wet. You can almost, I don't know if you can see the difference in tone here between where it's absorbed moisture and not. But there's that.
So Drew, what if you didn't have the piece of brick that broke off? Like, what if you got a kiln that was, say, secondhand and the piece of brick was missing? What would you do? Would you just get a piece of brick like you're using there and chisel out a shape or something?
There's a couple things that I would do. I'm going to show you here because when I put this piece on, I'm going to have some voids. I'm going to have some areas that are still in need of more space. And I'll show you what I do there. But then you can also mix this mortar to any consistency. So I could even thicken this up even more. I could add more mortar, more cement powder to this to make it into almost like a malleable clay. And you could use that as your cement. So let's see. One thing I didn't bring was something to put the mortar on with. So I'm just gonna use my hand. And I'm gonna take the mortar and I'm literally just going to dab it on the entire surface area that I need to replace where I want to join them. Okay. And now this brick is wet, which is allowing the mortar to stay wet. It's not getting absorbed. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm globbing it on really thick. And you tell me if you can't see it. I want to make sure it's visible to everybody.
I'm seeing it.
But you know, we're going to put that on there, and then we're going to figure out which way it goes. I'm going to apply pressure here, and you'll see I've got it like squeaking out the top here. So you can kind of just brush that off. And moving it around too much is going to cause it to not want to stay. So you kind of just apply your pressure, get it into position, and then scoop everything excess away. We have all this excess here. You see this? I don't know if you can see that. But all this excess is going to get wiped clean and nice and flat. And that leaves us with some voids. We've got like a void here. So we can take this thicker mortar and kind of just fill that void. Okay, and it's going to be, it's a little soupy. I probably want to thicken it up, but once you fill that void and let it set up, what's going to happen is when we fire this brick, if this was the wall, you know, if this brick was in your kiln, this would set up, and then when it goes to fire, the mortar is going to harden just like clay, and it's going to become solid. I need to thicken that up.
Now, both those pieces were wet before you started attaching
Oh,
them,
yes.
right?
These are
both those pieces. So if this was in your kiln, and you're going to repair it in the kiln, because that's, you know, where kiln brick often is, you would make sure the power was off, your kiln was unhooked, unplugged, or the circuit was off, the breaker was off, so that there's no chance of any electric issues, right? Safety first there.
I mean,
and then you would get
in theory, yes. You should always.
No, you would do that. You turn it on.
Anytime you're working on a kiln.
I just want to make that very clear to everybody. Make sure that I unplug my kiln from the wall when I do any work. Yes. I turn the breaker box off, but I also do, my kiln plugs in. It's not direct wired, so I unplug my kilns as well, just because I want to be sure that I'm using water and electric, they don't mix.
Yes.
You know, and so
I'm very paranoid about whenever I'm working.
And then we did have a question. Yeah, well, we should be, because it's electric. And then a question: if your kiln brick is yellow, it would be the same technique, right? It doesn't matter what color your kiln brick is.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what color. The only thing,
colors.
Yeah, the only thing that's going to matter is the firing temperature and what temperature your mortar is good to. And so, you know, as long as that is good, you are good. And so this guy here is just about done. And you see how I'm kind of making it, you know, I went through the cracks and now I'm kind of overlapping the cracks, you know, because I don't want this to come apart in the kiln. So we're gonna do that. And now realistically, this is a brick that is not in the kiln. I have another brick over here that I'm going to show you how to do a repair with. And this is an actual kiln brick. So this is your brick. And a lot of people will say like, okay, here's your brick and this bottom element piece fell off, right? And we want to put that back on as best we can. Now, having the whole thing here helps, right? We've got the whole thing, so it'll fit very nice and evenly. What some folks were asking there before was like, well, what would you do if we didn't have this piece? You know, mixing up this mortar to a much thicker consistency so that you can almost mold it in your hand, like a coil, is going to help you fix this. So we need to do the same set of steps, but we're going to do an extra set of steps after. So what we're going to do is get this wet, just like the other one. Okay, so nice and wet. Nice and wet. Boom, boom, boom. And then we're going to fill our in with mortar, but then we're going to take it a step further. So here's our mortar.
And I just want to tell everybody out there, I'm going to ask you about repairing cracks in the bottom and the top of your kiln and the lid after. We'll get to that.
Yes, I will address that. because I get that question a lot here at Clayscapes too. And so, you know, it's good to have as much information as possible. All right, so here we go. It's a lot easier to do this on the table here like this. You know, working on something like this in the kiln, you're going to be hanging over the front of it and upside down, and you're going to have to, you know, deal with gravity and things like that, which I don't have to deal with because we're flat on this tabletop surface. I'm going to get rid of you.
And I just want to let everybody know that's joining in now that Drew is doing this as a demo out of a kiln. This would normally be your brick that's still in your kiln. It wouldn't be out of your kiln. You wouldn't have to take this out of the kiln. This would be your brick on the wall of your kiln, and a chunk broke off and you're repairing it while that piece is still in the kiln. You don't have to pull this out. It's just Drew doesn't right now have a broken kiln to show us. Sadly, or I guess that's good. You don't have a broken kiln to show us how to fix.
I keep my kilns in excellent repair.
Right. So he's showing us an example, and we're pretending that the bigger piece of brick that he has is actually the wall of your kiln. And the small piece of brick is the broken chunk that you've accidentally knocked with a shelf, or you've got a kiln that it was secondhand and it's already broken, or something you're repairing your elements or something and you accidentally broke a chunk off. So imagine that the bigger piece is the wall of your kiln, and you'll be doing this with it vertically in the kiln, and you'll be repairing it. So this is just for demo purposes because we were waiting. Drew and I have been trying to do this demo for a couple of months now, waiting for him to get a broken kiln, but he just doesn't break his kilns.
Well, and the other thing that you have to think about is, you know, especially doing a brick repair like this, you know, this has got an element in it, right? And so realistically, you can't repair this brick without replacing this element. Okay, and so, you know, if I'm going to replace this brick, I can't have the element in there. If I'm working around the element, the risk of breaking that element is super high. And so we just try to avoid that. The next step I'm going to show you is a little shortcut here that is going to make especially something on the vertical surface of your kiln much easier. We're going to take our nichrome wire, and I'm going to cut it into like 1.5 inch strips. Okay, so if I took this guy here, we look, and I've got my pliers. Let's see if I can get some contrast here against that. So I have.
Go ahead and do this, and I got a bunch of questions.
Okay, I have this pin, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take multiple pins. And because the brick is so soft, once the mortar is in there, I'm going to pin it. Now, one thing that you need to think about is if this is vertical and I were to pin it straight in, it's not going to give me a ton of support. What I want to do is I want to pin it down and in so that it acts like a hook. Right? If I were to pin it up and in, this part here could slide off it. So vertically, I'm going to take this pin and push it into the brick. Now, the pin is right there. You can't even see it. But if I were to take this off, see where it is? It's sticking out there. And that is acting as a support for the brick part that's broken. And so I put a couple of those in there, which I'll do while you ask the questions.
All right. So the kiln cement you're using, or the refractory cement, where can you get that? Do you all sell that?
We sell that, but you should be able to get that at any like ceramic supply house, anybody that sells, you know, raw materials and things like that for clay, or anybody that sells kilns should have available to them mortar. But yes, we do sell it.
Okay, so, and I do know Mako does have a mixed, Mako also has a mixed kiln cement that they sell in pints too. So,
Yes.
or at least they used to. So that's a possibility. But you'll want to ask your ceramic supplier where you get your kilns, wherever you bought your kiln from. Clayscapes Pottery sells it. And do you sell it by the bag or by the pound?
We sell it by the pound because you never know how much you're going to need, right?
We sell it by the pound.
A pound would make,
yeah, that's true.
I mean,
and
this
is
was
there a particular,
way less than a pound.
that was an eighth of a pound, you said. So that would make 8
Yeah.
little repairs. So we're talking about the pins with the nichrome wire. What gauge was that you were using?
This is, I think, 14 or 15 gauge, 16 gauge.
And what would you say the angle was that you used for that to put it in?
Up. Like, I don't know. Like a 45 maybe?
45? I would say 45. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
and there's a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, there's a thing that you could do, right? So if I put these in both at a 45 like this, I could put another one in an opposite direction, and the contrasting angles will keep it held in place. So these two both went down. So maybe I'll put, you know, one in the middle here that goes up. And this creates a contrast in the direction of where the pins go, which makes it hard. Like, you can't just pull this straight off now because the pins are going in different directions. And so now it's, you know, really tight. The pins are almost entirely holding it in there. And then, you know, I can go back in and clean up the mortar cracks, and, you know, it'll be finished so that that'll fire on. And that's going to be a really solid brick repair right there.
So we got some questions. If you don't have mortar and have the piece, can you just use the pins if you already have those?
Yeah, in a pinch, you can just do that. We could show you that.
You could use the, yeah, I mean, you could just pin in the chunk of brick. There's no reason you can't do that. This will give you a, you know, when you pin it in, if the piece is too tiny, you can split the piece. You know, this is really a good way to do it if you're doing smaller pieces. If you have giant pieces, I would want to really use the cement just because I want, you just broke that, because I want it to be really secure, right? I don't want to have any risk that the pins aren't enough. Let's see, we got a couple more questions. So I'm sorry, but I'm scrolling through all.
It's okay. So in the meantime, we've got this piece here that I just broke, right? And we're gonna pin this back on, right?
Sorry.
We're missing a bunch. We're missing a bunch here, but we don't have any mortar. And the issue is, oh man, I've got this piece, but I don't want my element to sag down right here. I want to pin this in as quickly as possible, right? So you take your nichrome pin. That crack is a little deeper, so I'm going to put it a little deeper, which means I'm going to need a little bit longer pin. And we're going to pin it in place, and I'm going to show you how sturdy it is. So
we had a question about how long is the kiln cement workable?
It's going to be workable for a while. Look at that, I just bent it. It's going to be workable for a while, but it's going to dry pretty quick. Even though I've gotten this brick wet, this cement is already drying. You know, these kiln brick are super porous, and so they absorb a lot of moisture to the point where once you start putting the cement on the brick, you got to go. You got to get a little move on. But I don't have like a time frame of like how long it's good for. The wetter you get your brick, the longer the kiln cement is going to be malleable and workable. So this is on, right? We got one pin, but one pin doesn't do much, right? So I'm going to put another pin on, and I'm going to put it right here. I'm going to go at an angle this way. And we're going to get it to go in. Come on. that second pin is on. Now when I go to pull this up, it's a little loose, it's a little jiggly, but it won't come out because I have a pin going in one direction and a pin going in another direction. I'm going to put a third pin in this piece going in a radically different direction. Should keep it real tight. So,
and I'm just going to let everybody know that the cement doesn't cure till it's fired. So you have to fire it for it to really cure and fully be bonded to the kiln brick, just so you all know.
I will also say that when you are working with these pins, these metal pins, especially when you're working on brick near elements, you don't want the pins anywhere near your elements. Okay, if this pin goes in and it's touching this element, it's going to short it out and cause an electrical shortage. So even though I'm putting these pins in here, I'm making sure to stay clear of where the element track is going to go. I'm going to put you at...
You know, Drew, you could show us how to correctly pin an element in the brick if it's broken off and missing. Like if you had broken brick and you have to put the element in, even with the broken brick.
That's up, that's down.
Maybe, I don't know if you get the stuff to do it.
I will see if I have some elements, but this is an L&L brick. Get in there. So yeah, now it's real steady. So yeah, you just, you pin it in there, you let physics do its thing. Oh, oh, oh. Hey everybody, it's me.
So I'm just going to answer. We had a question. Will the nichrome wire eventually melt?
No.
No, it's meant to be in.
It is designed to fire to that temperature, so to higher temperature even.
And then a question: when you first fire your kiln after repairing the brick, do you fire it empty, or can you put your pieces in it and fire it?
You can put your pieces in it and fire it. I would always just put a really good preheat on it. You want to make sure that all the moisture is completely out of your brick and the mortar before you go into that firing schedule. You know how pots explode when moisture gets beyond boiling. And so, the same thing's going to happen in your brick if you fire it up and don't preheat it and get all that moisture out.
And there was a question, does it matter if it's a bisque or a glaze fire for your first time firing it?
Doesn't matter.
So no,
just fire it, doesn't matter. It.
So you just want to cure it. Now, lots of questions about if you have, someone said they have cracks in the bottom of their kiln, cracks in the lid. How do you deal with that? They don't want pieces of that brick, the refractory cement, the kiln cement falling down into their pieces. Right. You don't want that happening. So
what I will say is have hairline fractures, small cracks in the lid and the base of your kiln are super normal. It's nothing I would ever do anything as far as cement with, especially if you can't get if this crack, you see if this crack down here is pretty significant, that's something I would use mortar with. But like a small little hairline fracture, mortar is going to make that worse. And the reason being is the soft brick of a kiln expand when it heats up and contract when it cools down. And that causes them to press on each other and create these small hairline fractures. The issue that you have with mortaring those little hairline fractures is the soft brick expands and contracts, the mortar does not. And so when you mortar those little hairline fractures and those brick expand, they press against the mortar, which is now hard, creating an even bigger crack. So whenever you're going to do any kind of mortar work, you want to make sure that that crack is big enough to support that mortar so that when it expands and contracts, you're not making it worse.
And we have a question, how long do you wait for the mortar to dry out before you can turn the kiln on, or do you wait? without worrying
I
about it
mean,
exploding.
realistically, you could turn it on immediately as long as you're doing a preheat. And so that preheat is going to get rid of all that moisture. I would never just put it into a program. If you're going to do this, I mean, with the amount of moisture that you have to put into these brick, I mean, with this sponge, I was like wringing it out into the brick, and the brick just sucks it up, which is why you really didn't see like, you didn't see all this water come out because the brick absorbed it all. And so that takes a while to get out.
And with that preheat, would you do what, a 6-hour preheat for the brick?
Yeah, I mean, so
Repair?
normally I do like a 3-hour preheat on any bisque fire to begin with. So, in order to kind of accommodate that moisture, I would do a 6-hour preheat, and I would make sure that at the end of that preheat, I'm there so that I can check that piece that I fired, that piece that I mortared. If it's still wet, you got to go further. So being around and having access to that mortar spot is important. It's already setting up here. I can feel it. Like this is all stiffening. So
we have a couple more questions.
Yeah, I have other
Kathy
stuff.
just bought a used test kiln. You have other stuff to do. That's okay. I mean, we've got another 30 minutes. We can stay.
No, I know.
We got stuff to do. We can talk. We can ask questions. So
Yeah.
Kathy just bought a used test kiln on Sunday. Congratulations, Kathy. It's it's an Olympic 14T, and she needs to sweep out the bottom. But the brick elements and bulb are in great shape. Electrical being done Friday. Small cracks in the brick in the bottom. Should I fix it?
Unless you can see through the cracks, you leave them. You leave them. The lids, you can run into issues with lids. If the lid has a crack that goes all the way through the lid, and when you move your lid up and down, the lid will flex. And I actually have my lid behind me on my original kiln is in that kind of shape where it's really rough. And in that case, I'm not mortaring it, I'm replacing it.
And so we have a question. Anya has an old kiln. It's a kiln sitter kiln and doesn't do a preheat. And so she wonders, should she wait a couple of days or just turn it on empty for a few hours?
You could wait a couple of days. One thing that I do, you can candle, it's called candling, but you can candle like a kiln sitter kiln. Basically what I would do is I would turn on the bottom element on low. So just one element, just one switch, whatever you have, you turn it on low. If it's like on or off, you turn it on. You leave the peepholes open, you leave the lid propped a little, and that will slowly candle up to like a low temperature, and you can just keep an eye on it. That's what I would recommend doing for a preheat. It's just turning on that one switch and on low.
And we have Lindsay has a really good question. Will the moisture short the kiln? I have an L&L 18T and it cuts out when she has damp pots. Her supplier said it was getting the elements wet.
Okay. I don't necessarily agree. I would have to look into it, but it should not short out your kiln. No, especially if it's vented.
It's a red flag for me.
I don't necessarily believe that's why your kiln is shorting out. Unfortunately, like I don't want to go against your supplier, but it doesn't make sense to me.
No. Lindsay Jane, honey, reach out to Drew. He's on vacation this week, technically. I didn't say that in the beginning. Thank you, Drew, for coming in. It's his vacation, and he came in just for this. Next week, send him an email, and Drew will talk to you about that.
I mean,
because there's something it should
else
not cut out
there, for sure.
I put wet pots in my kiln and do a preheat all the time for glaze firing and never have a problem. So that's a red flag for me. So reach out to Drew and
It's
he'll
more
help
likely
you.
that there is some metal on
Ooh,
metal somewhere where it shouldn't be, or there's
yeah.
there's a loose
Okay.
connection or a short somewhere. Moisture in the kiln doesn't ever lead to shorting out the kiln. It just leads to pots blowing up. Like it's not. You would have your moist pots would have to be touching the elements. So.
And Lindsay says it's new and vented. Okay, Lindsay, definitely reach out to Drew there. And it's Andrew at clayscapespottery.com, right? That's your email? Everybody has it now.
Andrew at clayscapespottery.com,
So,
yes.
yeah, it's Andrew. That we call him Drew. He goes by
Yes.
Drew, but his full name is Andrew. And reach out to him and everything, because that should not be happening.
I'll figure it out for you.
So yeah, and yeah, Drew is so good. And if you didn't buy your kiln from him, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. He'll still help you out. It doesn't even matter. So we do have another question. How long have you had your old kiln that you have?
17 years. So it's an old L&L. It's one of the original Easy Fires. We've had it since my dad bought the business. We started our classes in our studio with 4 people taking class, and I've done a lot of repair work and modification to it over the years, just to, as kilns get older, they need repair. So, that's what I do. I should be on a beach somewhere now.
Yeah, you should be. I know, right? Shouldn't we all? We should all. Clayshare should have a vacation. We should have Clayshare. We've talked about the Clayshare cruise, or just like going to the beach, doing something. Like Clayshare goes to the Caribbean. Clayshare Con next time should be in the Caribbean. So, should anybody have to be worried about rusting elements if they're putting wet pieces in their kiln?
No. So, I mean, when we talk about like element degradation and why they deteriorate, the gases coming out of your pottery and, connecting with moisture in the air, they latch on to metal and eat through it. That is normal. If your elements are to the point where you're seeing like rust, or your elements are turning, that rusty color, it's not that the moisture in the kiln is causing it. It's just that they're needing to be replaced. It's just what they do over time.
And then we have a question about propping the lid. What do you use? Kiln posts or?
I use a kiln post.
Yes, me too.
I usually take a kiln post and put it sideways. Our posts are, I think, like 2 inches thick, or 1 3/4 inches thick or something. So I'll take like a 2-inch post and put it sideways to prop the lid, just a couple inches.
Another good question is, do you need to prop the lid if you have a hole in it? So some lids do have holes drilled in the top for vents.
No.
Yeah, you don't need to prop it if you already have a hole in it.
Yeah.
And let's see. Tiffany says she has the corner of her kiln has a chip and the piece is there, but do you mortar this in? It's on the outside. So the corner of her lid on the outside
so it's
has a chip.
Like the top part of the lid.
Outer corner.
So that's an issue, because if you were to like mortar that piece there, the mortar is never going to get fired, because the hot surface is the inside part of the lid, which your top side's never going to get that. So I would almost say take that piece and pin it in place. But no amount, like that's probably going to loosen back up over time, so it's going to need, it's better to just let it be. If it's not affecting the firing, just leave it alone. Because any like pinning and loosening and deteriorating again over time is eventually just going to make it worse.
And we did have another question about, which is a statement, putting wet pieces in kilns. Is that a thing? Linda, we mean not wet like soaking wet greenware, but freshly glazed pots that are wet because you just glazed them. So freshly they are wet pots. Because
And
But,
I've
you know,
put,
I always
I've
do a
had
preheat on my glaze.
students that have made stuff and, they're on a deadline, and we've taken big pots, like, 50, 75-pound pots off the wheel. They've been blow torched and stuff to set up and put them straight into the kiln, and then put, a 24-hour preheat, and then come back the next day and see if it's dry, and then fire it. Like, you can do whatever you want. You just need to make sure that you do the processes that you need to do to make sure there's no moisture, so that it's safe to continue even further. So, I mean, yeah, it's totally possible to fire a soaking wet piece. You just have to do a really long preheat.
And I just want to let you all, everybody's asked about propping a lid. If you run events, you don't need to prop your lid. I run events, I don't prop my lid. If you're running a kiln vent, you just run your kiln vent. You don't need to prop it. If you're not running a kiln vent, you will want to prop it, because you've got to get that moisture out somewhere. It's got to come out, and you want to let it escape. And so that's why we prop the lid. But if you're running a vent, don't worry about propping the lid. Just run your vent and it's fine. And then another question, do you sell elements for kilns?
What's that?
You were going to continue, and I'm on to the next thing. We had a question, do you sell elements for kilns?
Yeah. So I sell elements.
Yes, he sells kiln elements. Yeah,
I
they
sell.
do. Yes.
We sell L&L, Scott, Cone Art, kilns. And so I can get any parts you need for any of those kilns going back, even if it's like a 30-year-old Scott or something, like, we can get parts for it. And yes, we do, we sell elements, all that stuff. So I will say that firing the wet pieces, like, there's always a trade-off.
And we're talking about wet glazed pieces, not wet greenware pieces. I just want to make sure everybody's along with us that these are fired already, been glazed and wet. So that means you glaze them that day and you want to put them in the kiln right now instead of waiting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then back to propping the lid. What would you prop it to? If you're going to prop it, when I used to prop mine, I did it at the beginning of the firing all the way till I hit like 1200. Then I lowered the lid. I don't know what you prop your lid to.
I mean, realistically, as soon as you're out of that preheat segment, you can close the lid, right? One thing that you can know, especially if you have like a manual kiln and it's hard to tell, anybody with glasses or a mirror, when you lean down to look in your peephole or to look at the lid, you will get, your glasses will fog up. You can put your hand in front of that peephole and feel the air, and you'll actually be able to feel the moisture. That's actually how I feel whether or not the pots are ready to be turned up in the raku firing. You stick your hand over the chimney area and I can feel the moisture. And if it's dry and my hand is dry and it moves smooth like this, we're good. But if there's moisture in there still, it's going to stick. There's going to be some resistance. And so that you need to continue to preheat. But at anytime after 200 degrees, if you're not getting any condensation, you can close up your peepholes and your lid.
So hopefully that answers that. And so Charlotte has a question. She says, our kiln's not reaching cone 5, but the pieces look okay. The witness cones turn white but don't bend. Could it be faulty elements? They just installed a new thermocouple.
No, you know what? It's probably just firing a little under, depending on whether or not it's a digital or a manual kiln. One thing that folks get a little overly worried about is having like the perfect cones. I think Jess sets a super high standard as far as cones.
I should apologize. I've been making pottery for 20 years and firing my own kilns for that time. And I've been doing this full time for 17 years, firing kilns by myself and knowing my kiln really well. So I do apologize. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I do apologize. That's all.
It's okay.
That's all. Go ahead, Drew.
So what I
Tell
usually
everybody.
like to tell folks, especially if you're firing, we'll take cone 5, for example. I want to fire my kiln to cone 5. I put the program in. I've got my witness cones, 4, 5, and 6 in there. And when it's completely fired and unloaded, I've got my witness cones, and the 4 is bent over, the 5 is barely moving, and the 6 is not moved at all. So we didn't quite get to cone 5, right? It's possible that, you probably got some poor results. But if you didn't see any poor results, or if cone 5 was way over and cone 6 was starting to move and you got hotter than cone 5, the first question that you need to ask yourself is, well, what are my results like? Because a lot of the times, I would say 99% of the times, if I get a phone call that says like, oh, I'm firing a little bit hot, the results are fine. You don't need to be, it doesn't need to be that perfect bullseye cone every time you fire. Getting as close as you want, as close as you can, is always desired, but typically there's like a cone difference for a lot of glazes on, what's going to be acceptable. There's some things that like the Chun Blue is going to like it a lot better at 5, and then our Clayscapes iron saturate reds are going to like it a lot better at a hot 6. And so it's just about finding that middle ground that you're okay with. 7, 9, and that, understand that it's okay if it's not like a direct hit every time for cone.
You can, you can be a little bit off. And then, so what is your take on a dual media kiln not fusing on the bottom? So I think dual media, she's using it for glass and clay as well.
Well, every ceramic kiln could be used as a dual media kiln, especially the new L&Ls with the digital controllers, not the Dynatrons, the Genesis controllers, which we just ran our promo on. They have glass programs already built into them so that you could, if you wanted, run a glass program. I always like to recommend that folks be very careful when they're doing glass in a ceramic kiln, because the ceramic kiln is going to go up much hotter than you need to. And so unless you are on point with your programming, I've seen some bad stuff. Glass melts really low, and if it fires up to ceramic temperatures, you're going to have issues and problems with your kiln.
Yeah. We have some more questions. It's not.
Yeah, I can answer questions all day.
Here's one. It's not a repair question, but it's a firing question. Are you supposed to wear protective eyewear when you look inside the kiln?
I don't.
You should, though. I do recommend that you wear protective eyewear. There is eyewear available out there. If you're looking in the kiln, if you do it like once in a while, fine. But if you do it every firing, you should, because it can damage your eyes.
Yeah.
You're looking in that intense heat.
Especially if it's a manual
gas
kiln.
and reduction kilns, you're looking in it a lot. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You should wear protective eyewear. And then Meredith's question. Meredith, there's a lot of info in your question, huh? Email Drew. So, she's someone in her town is selling a GM 1414 Scott with accessories and a viewing hole for $1,500, and she wants to know if it's a good deal, and she's got a lot of information on it. I think there's a lot going on there for that information. And so Meredith, $1,500 just for that model is not a good deal, Drew says. I didn't even go into all the description, but he's like, no, just that flat alone, $1,500 for that kiln used is probably not a good, but definitely reach out. I see she said that maybe it's too much and she should reach out to Clayscapes. Yep. Yes. No, Meredith,
it sounds to me like that person wants too much. They want close to what they paid for it. And that's not a realistic price.
Yeah. And here's a great question, which I'm going to pass. I could answer, I could type it in, but I think there's more people have the same question. Can you bisque fire mid-fire clay for the bisque firing while you are glaze firing your low fire earthenware? So you could have two separate things happening in the kiln. Absolutely, positively. I do it all the time. So yes, yes, you can.
I always recommend, if you're going to fire in the same studio and have mid-fire and low-fire clay, make sure that your low-fire clay and your mid-fire clay are different enough. Don't have a white low-fire and a white mid-fire. Make sure that your low-fire is terracotta and your high-fire is white, or your low-fire is white and your high-fire is, a red stoneware. That way you don't ever get them mixed up, because it's going to happen that a low fire piece is going to get put in a mid fire firing, or a mid fire piece will get fired in a low fire firing, and one of those situations is a lot worse than the other.
Right. And then which L&L kiln do you recommend for crystalline glazes?
Oh man, for crystalline glazes, they have special kilns specifically designed for that. And I have my computer right here, and I can tell you momentarily what kiln I would recommend. Ooh. The Equad Pros are really good for that, the Equad Pros, but there's an additional glaze kiln, JH Crystalline Kilns. And they have them from small little 18-inch kilns. They've got mediums and they've got large, like a 10 cubic foot kiln. These kilns are specifically designed like Equad Pros, with even more power in them. And they're designed to go to cone 10 and hold it there for however long you need for crystal growth. And so and then they have thinner walls. They're not as thick of brick, because once you get up to that higher temp and you do that hold and you grow those crystals, as soon as you hit that limit of how many crystals you want to grow, you need to be able to drop the temperature really fast. So they've got that 2.5-inch brick to make sure that the kiln cools off quicker. So the JH Crystalline Kilns, it's a line of kilns that L&L sells, that I sell for L&L.
You sell it.
L&L doesn't sell them. They sell themselves.
Yeah. So we've got a couple more good questions. What size kiln would you recommend for the first purchase, for you're going to buy your first kiln ever? What one would you recommend?
Depending on your level of what you're making and like how much stuff you're making, I would either go with the 18S or the 23S. Those are my two most popular sizes. The 18S is smaller. You'll be able to do like dinner plate type stuff in it. And
just so everybody knows, the 18 means width. The 18 is width, so it's 18 inches wide. The 23 is 23 inches wide.
Yeah.
The S means 18 inches tall. So, because it's two sections. So think about what you're making. If you're making, really wide pieces, at least 23 inches wide, you want the 23. If you're making narrower pieces, you go with the 18.
Absolutely.
Sorry, just took your whole thing from me, didn't I? Sorry, dude.
That's okay.
I'll take that.
That's correct.
Look, everybody, I have not been working since last Thursday. This is my fix right here. Answer questions. I should just be live every day. I should just go live every day for a few hours and answer everybody's questions. I mean, that would work. So Rich has a good one. If your unglazed clay comes out shiny, does that mean it's close to melting the clay body? So the naked clay is shiny.
That is exactly what that means.
Vitrifying and going to the top of it.
It's over vitrified. So Rich. Because there's a difference between your clay vitrifying and your clay fluxing. And if your clay is becoming shiny, it's getting to the point where it's fluxing. And so you're riding that line of where it's going to melt. And you can play with forms, like, a big platter that fired to that temperature is going to slump, but like a cylinder may not, because of the structure. So fun stuff in there.
Yeah. And then we gotta, not to put us on the spot, but do we think a raku kiln kit is in the near future? I mean,
it's in the future.
It's in the future, in the near future.
So here's the thing. I already sell everything to make a raku kiln. I already have the fiber blanket and the burner system, and those are the two big parts. The part that I don't sell is the cage that you would need to line it, or the buttons that you would need to make in order to attach the fiber to the cage. There's a couple different ways to do it that I would have to think about, because I also don't want to say, hey, we've got raku kits available, and then I know what'll happen, and we're going to sell out of them. And so I would need to bring in all that stuff ahead of time in larger quantities. So realistically, I don't know if I could get it done by the summer, but I could try.
Okay, so a try. That
I
works
will know
if
I'm gonna have one. It's gonna be late May at the earliest.
So we got a couple more requests for pinning and elements. We did now, April, we did do a tutorial on pinning elements, replacing elements both in a scut and in the L&L. So there's two different how to replace your elements. We don't pin them in an L&L. One of the beautiful things about L&L kilns, but in scut kilns, you do have to pin them.
Yeah. So the thing is, I don't have any kilns that
need pinning.
Need elements pinned, because all my kilns are L&Ls, because I hate pinning elements. It's realistically, I could draw an example, but basically your element coil goes around and it lays in this track, and all you need to do is take a pin, take that coil where you have a space between them, and just put the pin through that coil at a downward angle into the brick behind it, and it will hold that element in place. But again, I don't have anything like that to do, unfortunately.
Right. But just so anybody who wants to see videos on how to replace the elements, including how to pin the elements in a scut, you can go watch the video Drew and I did on clayshare.com. If you go under kilns and firing, we did a scut, repairing your elements, replacing your elements. And we did one for L&L. So there's two separate ones on there for both types of kilns, which covers almost all the kilns out there. Like the way they're either has pins or doesn't,
yeah,
right?
Like it's either an L&L or it needs elements pinned.
Yeah, I think so. So I'm trying to keep up with our questions. You guys got a lot of great questions tonight, and we love them all. And if you're asking a question and we don't get to you, just know that there's a lot of questions coming in. So we'll keep going as long as just keep going. And so kiln washed, how often? I think kiln washing your shelves, how often?
Yeah, we only apply more kiln wash if we have a drip on the kiln wash that we have to chip it. And then, so we, chip the glaze away, we sand down the spot, and then we will reapply kiln wash. Sometimes it's a patch, just kiln wash that spot. Sometimes we grind the shelf all the way down and reapply a brand new kiln wash. We do that once a year to all of our kiln shelves. Is we will go in and grind down every single shelf and reapply kiln wash. Oh, come on, this is gonna drive me crazy now. I know this goes here.
So when I first get my kiln shelves, when they're new to me, I kiln wash them. And then I just, use them. And I don't do anything with them unless I have a drip, like Drew was just saying.
Yeah.
So it's, so I think there's been so many questions. We're about out of time, Drew. I think we're going to have to kick it back over here to me. But thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
And everybody else, I know we couldn't get to everyone's questions. There was so many questions tonight on, the questions we all have about kilns. It's not just repairing kilns, it's, replacing elements. It's also firing. I saw those questions glaze. about pinholing. I saw those questions There's about so pinholing. many things that there's so many is a huge
things
topic.
that
I mean, this is days of conversation, right? So if we didn't get to your question, you can reach out to me or Drew and we'll get back to you. We're going to do more of these. I think we should do a kiln glaze firing Q&A at least once a month from here on out. There's so many questions. And I even if it's the same thing that's been asked over and over, it's new to you. So we want to address that and we want to help you with that. And Drew will help you even if you don't buy a kiln from him. And even if you don't plan to buy a kiln from him, he'll help you out. He doesn't mind at all. He's part of our ClayShare family. That's what he does. So everyone else out there, I'm going to be doing a little mini tutorial in prime time for my premium members at 6:15. So I will see you all then. This weekend, we have a Kevin Kowalski Mocha Diffusion workshop. You sign up for that, you go to clayshare.com and you can register. Premium members save 20% off. Now you don't have to be a member to sign up. And when you do sign up for our workshops, you get access to them forever. So you get the live, which is 3 hours this Saturday and 3 hours next Saturday, right? And then you can watch the replay forever. So you can be part of the whole live experience, ask Kevin questions as he's going through the process and be there with us, and it's really fun. And then you can watch the replay forever and ever. So, and ask questions later on if you want to. So that's what we got going on this week in ClayShare. I will see everybody next Wednesday. Oh, it's mid-month next Wednesday. We'll see what we got planned for that. We'll have I have something up my sleeve. So you have to come back and see then. All right.